All right, we're going to do three things today. First, I'm going to go over chapter 15. Yesterday I went over 13 and 14. I've got those ready to put out on YouTube. You don't have to worry. There's no tests. There's no written tests. No hands-on tests. I'm going over this for completeness because this is stuff. Some of the stuff we'll be also covering next semester. All right. So I'm going to go over chapter 15 today. As you can see, it's how to work with browser objects, cookies, and web storage, and chapter 16 on arrays. Those two things. Then I just sent both of you an HTML file, and it's the same one that we did the other day. In other words, it is. Remember when we did that the other day? But now we're going to redo this, and I removed all of the HTML required stuff. All right, so we're going to change it, and we're going to do it with JavaScript. Tomorrow we're going to go over chapter 17, and we're going to do this one again with just jQuery. Then Thursday you're going to have a test just on chapter 10 where you're going to replicate this form basically and add a few more fields, and you're going to have to validate all of them three ways: with HTML, with JavaScript, with jQuery. Does that make sense? All right. And then if we can get all that stuff done, then Friday will be a lab, and all next week is lab. All right. So in this chapter, they talk about stuff, more advanced type of stuff. All right. They talk about the location object and the history object. My guess is that sometime during your lives when you have gone onto the internet, you've hit like the back button to see where you've been. All right. That'll allow you to work with history and a few other things. But if you don't know this, maybe you've heard this kind of thing before, that what you really should be doing at least once in a while when you go in and you're in your browser, I'm going to assume it's Chrome, but it'll work pretty much the same even if it's not. You should click over here where you see these three dots and go over to settings, and somewhere under, I think it's under advanced, it's in here someplace, they have a way that you can clear out your cache. You hear me? C-A-C-H-E, cache. You should do that. Because, not a bad idea. But what I'm saying is that otherwise people they know everywhere you've been going, on the internet, etc. They can still get some of that information. The other thing, too, is whenever you go out to a website, typically it leaves information about that site on your machine in cookies or in another way. We'll talk about cookies in a minute. But it's wasting space on your machine, especially if you've got an older machine. All right, and I'm not saying because yours is an Apple, I could care less. But I know in my afternoon class, I've got people in there, their stuff runs so slow. When I hit enter, I get a result. They'll hit enter, and it might take 2 or 3 minutes to get the result. And you want to do whatever you can to keep your machine running lean and mean. All right, so we'll talk about that. Talk a little bit about cookies. There's a tutorial application. There's a task list application. Now, next semester, near the end of the semester, we're going to talk about databases. You may think, well, I know what databases are, and good, maybe you do. Or you might think, I have no idea what databases really are. That's okay too. All right. But one thing that you can do with this newer version of HTML is you can basically use what's called web storage to act like a database on your own machine. All right, so we'll talk about that, and then talk a little bit about what you can do with Chrome. It's kind of what I was just showing you. All right. So first they talk about, and they show you an example here. You should be able by now to look at this and understand most of the stuff that's in here. I'm not saying everything, but let's go over it. All right. HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. All right. www.muroc.com. That's pretty obvious. It's Muroc's website. This 8181 is probably the port on your machine. So it's the number of the connection on your machine that you're using. Now, under the Muroc site, they are going to a folder called JavaScript. Under that folder called JavaScript, they're finding an HTML file called location.html. And they are passing to that file something called first, which is probably an initial, G, and something called last, which is probably a last name, which is Hopper. Does all that make sense? It's kind of explained in here, but not probably as succinctly as I just did. All right. So what can you do with this location? You can reload and you can replace. Have you ever gone out to a website where there's a broken link? All right. Sometimes today, if you go out, and I'm going to show you an example of this, if you look up on the screen, it used to be that when you wanted to go out to the site for Java, all right, which is a programming language, you won't learn it for a while, but look on the screen, you type in java.sun.com. Sun used to own Java. They've sold it to someone else, okay? But would you agree that if this works, I should go out to something like http://www.java.sun.com? Would you agree with that? Well, where do I go? I've been pushed to another website. See that? So it replaced the URL that I put in with this URL. Why? Because the URL I put in isn't active anymore. All right? So what happened there, what ended up happening there was a replace. And it took the URL that I gave and it replaced it with a different URL. Does that make sense? And that happened automatically. There was nothing I had to do to make that happen. All right? It happens all the time. All right? You may or may not know this, but occasionally, now, man, maybe I told you about this. I found this hilarious. Okay? When in 2016, before they had, when they had a lot of Republicans running for president, like they do Democrats now, Jeb Bush was one of the people running for president. All right, George Bush's brother. He had the website jebbush.com. Okay? Somehow he let that site lapse. In other words, he didn't pay. You have to pay to keep it every year. He didn't do that. Guess who bought it? Donald Trump. So when you went to jebbush.com and hit enter, it pushed you off the Donald Trump site. And that, as you probably guessed, it didn't make Jeb Bush's people happy. There was nothing they could do about it because Trump did nothing illegal. Right there. He just bought a domain. But people will do that. And the reason I'm telling you that is sometimes people will either say, I either don't like this domain, or somebody bought our company and they want to change the domain name, or whatever. All right? Okay. The history object will allow you to go back and forth to find out what pages you've been at. All right? Somewhere in your machine, in the cache of your machine, it does save. So I mean, and like, let's just assume, I don't do this, but let's just say I was always going out to playboy.com. I don't even know if there is a playboy.com. But let's say I was doing that all the time, and they wanted to get me in trouble here at Rankin. They could technically take my machine, look through it, and see, and if they could see that, they could say, well, you're going to sites you shouldn't be at, you're violating our morals clause, etc. All right, let them try. I don't care. I don't go out there. I don't know what the heck that is. All right. So as it says, the history object is an array. It holds a history of all the pages that have been loaded. All right. Now they've got this tutorial application in here, and what's kind of neat about this, if you see it, notice it says if you're an old hand, just click enter, and if you're not, click tutorial. Have you seen stuff like this before, where they'll say, if you're new to our site, click here. If you're not, click here. All right, so if you're new to the site, there'll be a tutorial that will show you your way around major commands, etc. This is a very simple example of that. And they show you the HTML for it, and they show you the JavaScript for it. You may not believe this, but you could write something like this. And you could do it I'm not going to, but if I said that's your next test, you could do it. It's really and truly not hard to do. All right. You know what cookies are? And I don't mean the kind you eat. They're basically their information that a web server copies to your machine. So if you go out to a site on a regular basis, they're able to kind of, for lack of better words, communicate with you and your machine. All right? Now, the other day I went out to Amazon and I bought a couple books that I'm going to be able to use this summer because I'm going to be teaching, I think again with Evan, I'm going to be teaching to the middle schoolers. Okay? Why am I telling you that? Because usually when I go out there, notice it's got recently viewed. And have you ever done this where you go out there and it says, hey, people who bought these kinds of books also bought these kinds of books. Why are they doing that? Yeah, but it's even simpler than that. They're doing that to make more money, right? Because they think if you were interested in this, you might be interested in this, for example. All right? So what do? They have literally gone in. All right, Paul Smith and I from St. Louis, we were online looking for different books for SQL. So see this? It's showing me a bunch of SQL books. And it does most of that stuff through the use of cookies. So as it says, it lets a web server or web page store information on a user's browser and retrieve it on an as-needed basis. The key thing here, cookies are text files. They're not executable. You can typically only have a certain number of cookies on your, at a time. Otherwise, everybody, every time you went to a site, they leave a cookie. And pretty soon you might not have enough room to do your own stuff. All right? So it says here, notice, it's pretty much looks the same as it did before. But it says a browser usually gets a cookie, all right, as part of an HTTP response. Then when it makes a request, you don't do anything to use that cookie, but the cookie is there. That's all. All right. So a cookie is a small text string. It can be as small as something like this. All right. When you set up cookies, you do things basically so it looks, I don't know, kind of like something like this. When you set up a cookie, usually cookies will have a time when they expire and they die. Okay? But if I wanted to do this, I could set up a cookie right now and I could tell it I wanted to expire 1,000 years from today. I could do that. And it would. I wouldn't be here to see it, but it would happen. So you can literally do that. Not only that, if I've got a cookie and I want it to go bye-bye, I can set a date that's already happened. So if I said I want that cookie to expire on December 9th at, let's say, 8 a.m., it would immediately get rid of it because December 9th was yesterday. All right? So it says cookie values can't include semicolons, commas, and white space, but there's ways of working around that. Should never have moved backwards. All right. How to read cookies. There are functions you can use to read cookies. All right. And there are functions the computer can use to read cookies. So as it says, when you assign the document.cookie object to a variable, its value is stored as a string. Cookie manipulation is possible because the cookie string follows a predictable pattern. The system can figure out what you're trying to do. Again, to delete a cookie, you set its max age to 0 or you set it to a date that's already passed. All right? Then they've got this task list. This is kind of cool. They work on this for pretty much the rest of the book. They call it a task list. Typically, you'd call it a to-do list. So I could type in here, get the car washed. Type in add task, it would add it to right here. Does that make sense? And I can do this. This is really simple. When you start making it more complex, if you look on the screen, I can highlight one or more of my tasks, and I'd have another button here that would say remove task, because it's done. Now I only have one button that says clear every task. If I've got 5 things on here and I only want one removed, I don't want to do clear tasks. So right now there's nothing I can do with it. Does that make sense? All right. So here's the HTML again. The task list lets a user build a list of tasks to be done, and it displays them in a text area. You can add new tasks, and notice the tasks are stored in a persistent cookie. Who cares? Persistent means even when you log out, if you tell it to remain, let's say for a year, that task list will remain for a year, unless you go in and manually remove it. So here's the JavaScript. Notice we're setting a cookie here, we're getting a cookie here. Web storage, I mentioned this before, I want to say it again. Notice in the past, cookies were the only way you could save things on your own machine. Now with web storage, there's a certain part of your machine that you can use like a database. It'll save things for you. When they say persist, typically, it used to be in the past, there were only 3 ways that something could persist. All right, you'd put it in a database, really 2 ways. You'd put it in a database or you'd put it in a file. Now with web storage, there's a 3rd way. And there's 2 kinds of web storage. There's local storage and session storage. Local storage will stay as long as you tell it to. Session storage, as soon as you end your session. So as soon as you log out, it'll go away. You can see it's a little bit more complex than what we've been working with. All right, but there's sets and there's gets. So they redo this task thing. It doesn't look any different, but now, since they're not using cookies, since they're using web storage, you could tell it to persist really forever if you wanted it to. All right, last thing, how to use Chrome to work with items in the browser. This is what I started mentioning to you. All right. So you can check a lot of stuff by coming in here and hitting F12. This is what they're talking about. You can go in and see a lot of stuff that's occurring on the network. All right. You can see how your memory is being used. You can see the applications you have running, etc. And that's what they're trying to show you here. You can also use that area, as it says in the application panel, to work with cookies. Now, I'm not going to show much in mine, okay, because I don't have any cookies up and running. But if I did in here, it would show them right there. Actually, I guess I still do. Look, there's my Amazon cookies. All right, and there's a few other ones. So notice here's the one with MSDN. So if I click on that one, it shows me the information. I should be able to right mouse click on it, clear it, boom. All that information is now gone. All right. That's it for this chapter. So